The water rushed through my living room like a freight train, swirling brown and angry around my furniture. I stood on my stairs, watching helplessly as family photos floated past, their memories dissolving in the muddy torrent. Outside, through my window, I could see my neighbors wading through chest-deep water, desperately clutching whatever possessions they could save. Sirens wailed in the distance as emergency vehicles tried to reach our submerged neighborhood, but they could not get through. No one could get through. And all I could think about was the letter. That official HOA letter with its gold, embossed logo that had arrived exactly 3 months earlier demanding I remove my unauthorized water management structure. The dam I had built with my own hands that had protected this valley for 15 years. The dam they had destroyed against all professional advice. I watched as Karen Walsh, our HOA president, stood on her expensive porch, now halfway underwater, screaming at rescue workers about property values and liabilities. The same words she had used when ordering the destruction of my dam. That was the moment I realized that some disasters are not acts of nature. They are acts of human arrogance. And this flood was about to wash away more than just our homes. It was about to expose everything. I purchased my dream property 15 years ago when the development was still new, and the HOA was just a friendly gathering of neighbors who met twice a year to plan block parties. 5 acres on the edge of the neighborhood with a natural creek running through it. The water flowed year-round, creating a perfect habitat for local wildlife and providing natural irrigation for my garden. Most important to me was the sound, that peaceful, constant babbling that greeted me every morning when I opened my windows. During my second year on the property, after researching proper water management techniques and consulting with a local engineer friend, I built the dam. It was not an impulsive project. I spent months studying watersheds, water rights, and proper construction methods. The dam itself was modest, just 4 feet high and 20 feet across, built with natural stone and reinforced concrete. It created a small pond upstream and controlled the flow of water downstream, particularly during our increasingly unpredictable rain seasons. The pond became home to frogs, dragonflies, and the occasional visiting duck family. My neighbors would bring their children to see the wildlife. Old Mr. Johnson from 3 houses down would sit by the water on summer evenings, fishing for the small bass I had stocked. The dam was never just about water management. It became the heart of our little community corner. For 12 peaceful years, the dam did its job perfectly. During heavy rains, it held back surges of water, releasing it gradually to prevent flooding downstream. During dry spells, it maintained a consistent flow that kept the entire ecosystem healthy. County inspectors who came for unrelated permits always commented on how well-designed it was for a homeowner project. Everything changed when the original HOA president moved away and Karen Walsh was elected to replace him. Karen lived in the largest house at the bottom of our sloped neighborhood. Her first act as president was to triple our annual dues to fund community improvements, which mainly consisted of ornate landscaping around her part of the neighborhood. I first met Karen on a sunny Tuesday morning when I found her standing by my dam, taking photographs with her phone. I approached her with a friendly wave, but her expression remained cold and calculating. "Good morning," I said. "Can I help you with something?" Karen lowered her phone and stared at me as if I had interrupted something important. "I am conducting an inspection of unauthorized structures in the neighborhood," she said. "This water feature does not appear on any of our approved plans." I explained that the dam predated her time in the neighborhood and had been there for over a decade with full knowledge of previous board members. I offered to show her the engineering specifications and water flow management data. "That will not be necessary," she said, making a note on her clipboard. "The Architectural Control Committee will make the final determination. You should expect formal communications soon." True to her word, 3 days later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. The envelope bore the new gold-embossed HOA logo Karen had commissioned at considerable expense to the community fund. Inside was a formal notice of violation regarding an unauthorized water management structure that posed potential liability issues for the community. I read the letter twice, unable to believe what I was seeing. The dam had existed without issue for 12 years. It had prevented flooding during several major storms. It had created a beautiful environment that everyone enjoyed, yet suddenly it W. As a problem. That evening, my neighbor Thomas came over with a six-pack of beer and a similar letter. His greenhouse, which had stood for 8 years, was suddenly an unauthorized structure. We sat by the pond, watching the sunset reflect on the water. She is just flexing her new power, Thomas said, shaking his head. Last month it was the Peterson family's fence. Now it is your dam and my greenhouse. Next month it will be something else. I did not realize then that this was just the beginning. That single letter would set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately destroy not just my dam, but Karen's home and reputation as well. The peaceful sound of flowing water continued that evening, giving no indication of the storm that was coming. The weeks following that first letter brought an escalating barrage of official HOA communications. Each envelope that arrived felt heavier than the last, weighed down not by paper, but by the growing hostility they contained. The second notice increased the violation severity to urgent and imposed a daily fine of $50 until the dam was brought into compliance or removed. I did what any reasonable person would do. I gathered documentation and prepared to defend my property. I hired a professional engineer who specialized in small waterway management to inspect the dam and provide a formal report. The results were exactly as expected. The dam was properly constructed, posed no safety hazard, and actually provided significant flood protection for downstream properties. The report explicitly stated, removal of this structure would negatively impact watershed management for the entire development, particularly for homes in lower elevations. Armed with this professional assessment, I requested time to present at the next HOA meeting. The community center was packed that evening with homeowners dealing with their own violation notices. Karen sat at the center of the board table, a position she had specifically designated for herself, with a larger chair than the other board members. When my turn came to speak, I approached the microphone confidently. "Good evening. I would like to address the violation notice regarding my water management structure. I have brought copies of a professional engineering report that—" "Your time is limited to 3 minutes," Karen interrupted, not looking up from her notes. "Please be concise." I continued, attempting to explain the importance of the dam for flood prevention. I held up the engineer's diagrams showing water flow patterns during heavy rainfall. As you can see, without this structure, during our next major rain event, the lower properties would be at significant risk of. "That is speculation," Karen cut in again. "The HOA bylaws clearly state that no water management structures can be built without prior board approval, which you never received. The dam was built 12 years ago before those bylaws existed," I explained. Karen's smile did not reach her eyes. Grandfathering unauthorized structures would set a dangerous precedent. The board has made its decision. Next speaker, please. I stood there, engineer's report in hand, as a security guard motioned for me to step away from the microphone. As I returned to my seat, I noticed several neighbors avoiding eye contact, afraid of becoming Karen's next target. After the meeting, I learned the truth from another board member who approached me in the parking lot. He spoke quietly, constantly glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "It is not about the bylaws," he whispered. "Karen's house sits at the lowest point in the neighborhood. She has had water in her basement twice during heavy rains. She believes your dam is somehow causing it, that you are redirecting water toward her property." "That is absurd," I replied. "The dam prevents flooding. Removing it would only make her situation worse." He shrugged. "Logic does not matter. She wants it gone and she controls the board votes." The following Sunday, I found a group of my neighbors gathered by the dam. They had started a petition supporting my water management structure and opposing what they called HOA overreach. 63 signatures in total, more than half the neighborhood. I felt a surge of hope. That hope evaporated 3 days later, when I received a certified letter from an attorney representing the HOA. It stated in cold, legal language that I had 30 days to remove the dam entirely, or the HOA would do it themselves and bill me for the costs. plus additional punitive fines. That night I could not sleep. I stood by my bedroom window, looking out at the moonlight reflecting off the pond. A family of deer drank quietly from the water's edge, unaware that their oasis would soon be destroyed by human pettiness and misplaced authority. The tension building in my chest matched the pressure building behind my dam. Something, eventually, would have to give. I spent the XD week consulting with a real estate attorney about my options. The consultation was not cheap, but I needed to understand my legal standing. The attorney reviewed my property deed, the HOA covenants, and the series of violation notices. Unfortunately, she said, setting down the documents with a sigh, while the HOA's position is morally questionable, they do have technical authority here. The updated bylaws they passed 2 years ago included a retroactive clause about water features. It is poorly written and probably would not hold up in court, but fighting it would cost you tens of thousands of dollars and take years to resolve. So I just have to destroy something that protects the entire neighborhood because one person misunderstands hydrology, I asked, frustration evident in my voice. You could appeal to the county environmental department, she suggested. They sometimes intervene in cases where removal of a structure could cause environmental damage. I followed her advice and submitted an urgent request to the county. Their initial response seemed promising. An environmental officer was scheduled to visit and assess the situation. But the day before the appointment, I received a terse email saying the inspection had been canceled because private HOA matters fall outside county jurisdiction unless there is immediate danger to public property. Later, I learned that Karen's husband played golf regularly with the county commissioner. Another door closed. Several neighbors offered to contribute to a legal fund if I wanted to fight the HOA, but the estimated costs kept climbing. Others suggested more direct approaches, ignoring the order or organizing a special meeting to vote out the board, but most were afraid of becoming targets themselves. The same fear that keeps dictators in power was working perfectly in our small suburban community. The deadline stated in the certified letter approached. I had taken a day off work to meet with one final engineering consultant who believed he could design a modification to the dam that might satisfy the HOA requirements while still providing flood protection. We had scheduled the meeting for 2:00 p.m. At 10:17 a.m., my phone rang. It was my neighbor across the street. "They are here," she said, her voice shaking. "A construction crew, they have equipment, they are heading toward your dam right now." I drove home breaking every speed limit, arriving to find 2 yellow excavators already positioned around my dam. A crew of workers in hard hats stood by while a man in a suit, whom I later learned was Karen's personal contractor, supervised the operation. A police car sat in my driveway and an officer approached as I jumped out of my vehicle. "Sir, please remain calm," the officer said, hand resting casually on his belt. "The Homeowners Association has a court order to remove an unauthorized structure on this property." "Court order? What court order?" I demanded. "I was never served any court documents." The officer shrugged. "I am just here to keep the peace. You would need to take that up with the HOA." I watched in helpless rage as the excavators began tearing into my dam. The sound of concrete cracking and stones tumbling was physically painful. Each bite of the machines destroyed years of work and care. Water began rushing through the growing gap, already carving new channels through the soft earth. The small ecosystem I had nurtured for over a decade was being obliterated in minutes. The pond drained rapidly, stranding fish and destroying nests. A family of ducks that had returned to the same spot for years circled overhead, confused by the sudden transformation of their home. I stood there, fists clenched, as tears of fury blurred my vision. When the destruction was complete, Karen arrived to inspect the work. She stood at the edge of what was now a muddy depression, designer boots carefully placed to avoid the muck. Her smile was triumphant as she approached me. "The unauthorized structure has been removed according to HOA bylaws," she said loudly enough for the police officer to hear. "You will receive an invoice for the removal costs plus administrative fees totaling $22,000, due within 30 days. I stared at her, unable to form words through my anger. She mistook my silence for defeat. "Perhaps next time you will think twice before ignoring HOA regulations," she added, then turned to leave. As if to punctuate the injustice of the moment, the sky darkened overhead. The weather forecast had predicted the beginning of our rainy season, but the heavy clouds gathering now suggested something more severe. The first fat raindrops began falling as Karen's luxury SUV pulled away, splashing through puddles already forming where controlled waterways had existed just hours before. That night, alone in my house, I listened to the increasing intensity of rain hammering against my roof. Without the dam to manage the flow, R was now carving a new, aggressive path downhill, directly toward the lowest points in our neighborhood, directly toward Karen's house and those of her fellow board members. A part of me wanted to warn them. A larger part wanted justice to take its natural course. The rain continued through the night, steady and relentless. I did not sleep. Instead, I sat by my window, watching the water find new paths across my property, cutting channels where none had existed before. My concern was not just vindictive satisfaction. I genuinely feared for the safety of homes downstream. Despite everything, these were still my neighbors. By morning, the meteorologists on local news were using terms like unprecedented rainfall and potential flood conditions. The weather system had stalled directly over our county, dumping inches of rain with no sign of moving on. Schools announced closures. Emergency management officials advised residents in low-lying areas to prepare for possible evacuation. I pulled on rain boots and a waterproof jacket and ventured outside. The destruction of the dam had created an unrecognizable landscape. Where once there was a controlled flow through a defined channel, now there was a chaotic rush of water spreading in multiple directions, carrying soil, mulch, and debris downhill. I took dozens of photographs and videos, documenting the water's path and timestamp, in each one. The engineer in me knew this evidence might be important later. By midday, the situation had worsened considerably. The rain showed no signs of stopping, and the ground was completely saturated. Water that would normally have been held back by my dam and released gradually was now surging toward the lower sections of the neighborhood, exactly as the engineering report had warned. My phone began buzzing with text messages from neighbors downstream. The first was from Thomas. "Street is flooding, water coming into garages, what is happening?" Then from the family 2 houses down, "Kids' playroom underwater, is this because of your dam?" I responded to each message with the truth. The HOA destroyed the dam yesterday. This is exactly what the engineers predicted would happen. Around 3:00 p.m., emergency sirens began wailing. A county alert flashed on my phone, flash flood warning, immediate evacuation recommended for Lakeview Estate's lower section. Emergency shelter established at Westside High School. I grabbed my rain jacket again and drove to the entrance of our neighborhood, where I could see down into the lower section without endangering myself. The sight was shocking. Streets had become rivers. Water lapped at front doors and poured into basements. A few residents waded through knee-deep currents, carrying possessions to their cars. Emergency vehicles had established a perimeter, but were clearly struggling to access the worst-hit homes. An emergency community meeting was hastily organized at the local fire station, located on higher ground. The community center where HOA meetings were normally held was already taking on water. I arrived to find the place packed with wet, angry residents. County emergency officials stood at the front alongside a visibly shaken HOA board. Karen stepped forward, her designer outfit replaced by practical rain gear that still somehow looked expensive. Her hair was perfectly styled despite the weather, but her composure was cracking. "This is an unprecedented weather event," she began, her voice struggling to maintain authority. "The county emergency team is doing everything possible to mitigate damage and ensure safety." "This is because of the dam you tore down," someone shouted from the back. Karen's eyes narrowed. "That is absolutely false. The unauthorized water feature was a liability that—" "Show them the videos," Thomas called out, pointing to me. All eyes turned in my direction. I connected my phone to the projector the emergency team had set up. The images were clear and damning, timestamps showing the water flow patterns immediately after the dam's destruction, followed by the progressive flooding as the rain intensified. The engineering report's predictions were playing out exactly as written. A county hydrologist who had been called in to assist with the emergency response studied the images carefully. "This dam," he said, pointing to photos I had taken before its destruction, "where exactly was it located?" I showed him on a map, and he nodded grimly. That location would have provided significant retention capacity during an event like this. Its removal definitely contributed to the accelerated water flow we are seeing downstream. Karen pushed her way forward. "That is not true. His improper landscaping and amateur water feature were never properly engineered. If anything, he is responsible for this disaster." The hydrologist raised an eyebrow. "Do you have any evidence to support that claim? Any hydrological studies or impact assessments from before the removal?" "Well." Karen fell silent, and another board member nervously stepped forward. "We did receive a professional engineering report advising against removal, but we determined it was biased because the homeowner commissioned it." A murmur of disbelief spread through the crowd. The county emergency director took control of the meeting, focusing everyone on immediate safety concerns rather than blame. But the damage to Karen's credibility was done. As residents filed out with emergency instructions and evacuation plans, the glares directed at the HOA board were unmistakable. That night the rain reached its peak intensity. From my property on higher ground, I could see flashing emergency lights reflecting off the floodwaters below. National Guard trucks had arrived to assist with evacuations. And somewhere down there, Karen Walsh was watching the water rise in her luxury home, water that my dam would have held back, water that her arrogance had released. Dawn broke on a neighborhood transformed. The rain had finally stopped, but its aftermath was devastating. As I walked through my property, I could see how the water had carved new gullies and channels where solid ground had been just days before. But my home, situated on higher elevation, had suffered only minor damage. It was the homes downstream that had borne the brunt of nature's fury and human foolishness. County officials had established a command center at the neighborhood entrance. Residents returning to check on their homes were required to register and wear identifying vests, as structural engineers assessed which buildings were safe to enter. Television news crews lined the perimeter, their satellite trucks broadcasting images of the disaster to the wider community. I approached the command center, where Thomas was speaking with a county engineer. He waved me over. "They want to see your documentation," he said, "all of it." The county engineer introduced herself as Dr. Melissa Rivera, head of the Environmental Impact Assessment Team. "We understand you had a water management structure that was recently removed," she said. "We need to see any plans, permits, or engineering reports you might have." I provided everything: the original construction plans, maintenance records, the recent engineering assessment warning against removal, and the HOA's demand letters. Dr. Rivera studied them carefully while her team examined my videos of the water flow patterns. "This is textbook watershed mismanagement," she concluded, shaking her head. "The dam was functioning exactly as intended, providing retention capacity during heavy rainfall events. Its removal directly contributed to the downstream flooding." Her official assessment was added to the county's incident report. That report would prove crucial in the days to come. By midday, I joined a county-organized tour for affected residents to view their properties. We rode in high-clearance National Guard vehicles through streets still partially submerged. The damage was heartbreaking. Homes where families had built their lives stood waterlogged and muddy. Personal possessions littered front yards, furniture, photographs, children's toys all ruined by the flood. The worst destruction was concentrated in the lowest part of the neighborhood, where the most expensive homes had been built. Karen's Tudor-style mansion had taken on over 4 feet of water on the first floor. As our vehicle passed, I could see crews already at work pumping water from her basement and removing damaged materials. Karen herself stood on her driveway, directing workers and speaking animatedly into her phone. When she noticed our vehicle, her expression changed from frustration to rage. She marched toward us, pointing directly at me. "This is all your fault," she shouted, her composure completely abandoned. "Your illegal dam modifications caused this disaster." The National Guard driver stopped, and a county official stepped down to intercept Karen. "Ms. Walsh, this is not the appropriate time for—" "I want him arrested," Karen continued, her voice rising hysterically. "He deliberately engineered this flooding." Several neighbors who had exited the vehicle exchanged uncomfortable glances. Thomas stepped forward. "Karen, the county engineers have already determined that removing the dam caused the flooding. We all saw the reports yesterday." The confrontation might have escalated further, but at that moment, a man in a suit approached, introducing himself as a representative from the insurance company handling most of the neighborhood policies. He had been surveying the damage and overheard the exchange. "Excuse me," he said, his tone professionally neutral but his expression severe. "Did I understand correctly that an existing water management structure was deliberately removed against professional engineering advice prior to this flood event?" Karen's attorney, who had appeared at her side, placed a warning hand on her arm. "Boo." It was too late. The insurance representative made notes on his tablet and requested copies of all documentation related to the dam and its removal. By evening, word had spread throughout the neighborhood. Insurance investigators had begun formal inquiries into the HOA decision-making process. The implications were enormous. If the flooding was deemed to result from negligent governance rather than a natural disaster, insurance companies might deny coverage for millions of dollars in damages. Local news crews connected the dots quickly. The evening broadcast featured side-by-side images of my dam before removal and the flooded neighborhood after, with the headline, "Preventable Disaster, HOA Decision Under Investigation." As I watched the broadcast from the emergency shelter where many neighbors had gathered, I felt no satisfaction. The vindication came at too high a cost: homes destroyed, lives disrupted, a community traumatized. An elderly couple who had lived next door to Karen approached me quietly. "We voted against removing your dam," the husband said. "Not that it mattered. Karen always got her way." "Not anymore," his wife added, glancing toward where Karen sat isolated, no one willing to join her table. 1 week after the flood, an emergency HOA meeting was called. Unlike the normal meetings held in the community center, this one took place in the high school auditorium, the only venue large enough to accommodate the entire neighborhood. The atmosphere was charged with tension as residents filed in, many still living in temporary accommodations while their homes were repaired. The HOA board sat at a table facing the crowd, with Karen conspicuously seated slightly apart from the others. County officials and representatives from 3 insurance companies occupied front-row seats. Legal pads and recording devices were abundant. The HOA vice president opened the meeting, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "We are here to address the recent flooding event and discuss next steps for our community recovery." He was immediately interrupted by shouts from the audience. The meeting moderator, a neutral attorney brought in specifically for this purpose, called for order and established ground rules for the discussion. Then he invited the county assessment team to present their findings. Dr. Rivera approached the podium with a stack of documents and a USB drive containing her presentation. The images projected on the screen behind her told the story clearly: satellite views of water flow patterns before and after the dam removal, combined with rainfall data and topographical maps. "Our conclusion is unequivocal," she stated. "The removal of the water retention structure at the upper property directly contributed to the accelerated flooding downstream. Had the structure remained in place, our models indicate flood damage would have been reduced by approximately 60 to 70%. The insurance representatives presented next. Their message was equally blunt. "Based on our preliminary investigations," said the lead adjuster, "there is substantial evidence that the HOA board acted against expert advice and failed to conduct proper impact studies, before ordering the removal of a functional water management structure. This may constitute negligence under the terms of most homeowner policies. A stunned silence fell over the room as the implications became clear. Then the representative delivered the final blow. Claims resulting from demonstrable HOA negligence would not be covered under standard policies. Affected homeowners would need to seek compensation directly from the HOA. Angry voices erupted throughout the auditorium. The HOA's emergency fund totaled less than $200,000, a fraction of the estimated damage. One homeowner, a normally quiet woman whose basement apartment had been completely destroyed, stood up. "I move for the immediate dissolution of the current HOA board and the establishment of an emergency committee to address this crisis." The motion was seconded by dozens of voices simultaneously. Karen finally rose to speak, her attorney whispering urgently in her ear. "This is a complex situation that requires careful consideration," she began, her voice struggling to project authority. "The board acted in what we believed was the best interest." "You acted in your best interest," someone shouted. "You ignored professional advice," added another voice. The moderator called for an official vote. The result was overwhelming, 92% in favor of dissolving the current board. Karen and her supporters were out, effective immediately. A new emergency committee would be formed, with elections to be held the following week. As the meeting concluded, a process server approached the former board members. He carried thick envelopes containing notification of a class action lawsuit filed by 37 homeowners whose properties had suffered the worst damage. The suit named each board member individually, alleging breach of fiduciary duty and negligent governance. I had not joined the lawsuit, a fact that did not go unnoticed. As people filed out of the auditorium, several neighbors approached to ask why. "My goal was never financial," I explained. "I just wanted the truth to be acknowledged." The newly appointed interim HOA chair, a retired civil engineer named David, pulled me aside. "We need your help," he said. "The county is fast-tracking approval for a new watershed management system, and no one understands the water flow on this property better than you. Would you be willing to serve on the emergency committee?" I hesitated, remembering the stress and conflict of the past months. But looking around at my neighbors, people coming together to rebuild their community, I found myself nodding. As we left the auditorium, I passed Karen standing alone by her car. Our eyes met briefly. There was no triumph in my gaze, no gloating, just the simple acknowledgement that some lessons are learned too late and at too high a cost. 1 year after the flood, our neighborhood gathered for the dedication of the new community watershed management system. The autumn air was crisp and clear, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and new beginnings. Where my simple dam had once stood, a more comprehensive structure now managed the creek flow. Designed by professional engineers with input from county water management experts, the new system included a larger retention pond, properly reinforced banks, and a series of overflow channels designed to handle even the most extreme rainfall events. But it was more than just a functional water system. The area had been transformed into a community space, with a walking path circling the pond, benches placed at scenic viewpoints, and native plants restoring the natural habitat. Children fed ducks from a small observation deck while their parents chatted nearby. What had once been my private dam had become a public resource, one that served both practical and recreational purposes. The recovery process had not been easy. Many homes required extensive repairs, and some residents had chosen to sell rather than rebuild. The class action lawsuit against the former HOA board had been settled out of court, with insurance companies ultimately covering most damages after determining that the board's actions constituted gross negligence rather than standard governance decisions. Karen Walsh had moved away, her house sold at a significant loss. The last I heard, she had relocated to a condominium in another state. The other board members had apologized publicly and worked to make amends by participating in community restoration efforts. As the current chair of the newly structured Community Watershed Committee, I had spent countless hours working with experts to ensure our neighborhood would never again face such a preventable disaster. The experience had changed me. I was more assertive now, more willing to speak up against unreasonable authority, but also more understanding of the need for proper processes and communication. David, the retired engineer who had led the interim committee, handed me the ceremonial ribbon and scissors. "Would you do the honors?" he asked. I looked out at the gathered crowd. These were not just neighbors anymore, they were friends who had weathered a crisis together and emerged stronger. Thomas stood with his family, his greenhouse now rebuilt and expanded into a community garden project. The elderly couple who had lived next to Karen now hosted the monthly committee meetings in their renovated home. Even some former board members were present, their contrition genuine after seeing the consequences of their actions. "This project represents more than flood control," I said as I prepared to cut the ribbon. "It represents what happens when a community learns to respect both nature and expertise. Water will always flow downhill, that is a force we cannot change. But how we manage that flow, how we work with nature rather than against it, that is within our control." The ribbon fell away, and applause rippled through the crowd. Children raced to the pond's edge, excited to explore the new paths. Adults lingered to examine the informational plaques explaining the system's function and the history that necessitated its creation. As the celebration continued around me, I walked to the observation point overlooking the pond. The water reflected the blue sky in autumn colors, peaceful once again. Sometimes destruction leads to better rebuilding. Sometimes a flood of trouble washes away what needs to be changed. And sometimes justice flows as naturally as water finding its proper course.